A new expansion is upon us! It's March of the Lich King and Death Knight, a new class, is coming to Hearthstone with that expansion. Wait a second, I'm not dressed properly for this. I'm bringing it back! The Lich King's Ice Cream Citadel shirt, very appropriate. Death Knights are coming to Hearthstone. Holy cow, new class coming to the expansion March of the Lich King, biggest expansion ever. Biggest expansion ever. Biggest expansion for a lot of reasons. 145 cards instead of the usual 135, but it's so big that they had to include a mini expansion just for Death Knights, as well as a bunch of new core cards. And these cards are really strong. In fact, some of the cards are outright overpowered, but there's a way that they're doing it so that they balance these overpowered cards. Will they succeed, or will Death Knight be super OP? Well, let's take a look. First of all, their hero power, Ghoul Charge. 2 mana to summon a 1/1 ghoul with charge, and at the end of the turn it dies. So this is an advantage because you get a corpse, because each time any friendly minion dies on the Death Knight side, you get a corpse. And corpses are good because they fuel up your spells. If you buff it, that's another strong point. One of the reasons why Stone Tusk Boar was problematic is because, just a 1 mana charge minion could be overpowered. Well, now you can summon Stone Tusk Boar whenever you want on your hero power. Wow. Now, presumably they're balancing this around the idea that Death Knights will not actually have single target buffs. It's not in flavor. What is in flavor for Death Knights? Well, they have 3 different specs. Red for Blood, Blue for Frost, Green for Unholy. A lot of the cards on Death Knights have rune deck building restrictions on them. The cards have runes on them. When you build your deck, you select a combination of 3 runes that you're allowed to use for your deck. There's actually 10 different combinations in all, but the deeper you go into a specific rune, the stronger your cards will be for that deck. So let's take a look at these cards. And again, it's going to be pretty hard to evaluate them because we're missing so much knowledge about how Death Knights even work and build the deck. We're starting from 0, and we don't know a lot of the cards. So let's begin with a card that actually doesn't have a rune requirement, and this seems to be rare. Only 2 of the 21 cards revealed have no rune requirement. Icy Touch. 1 mana frost spell, deal 2 damage to an enemy and freeze it. Frost Bolt, except -1 mana and -1 damage. Seems pretty good, but over time, these damage spells have gotten less and less impressive. Still though, Icy Touch might actually be run in Frost spec Death Knights, because that rune set of cards appears to be ones that synergize a lot with spells and ones that synergize with Frost. So it definitely seems like a solid card, strong even, but I doubt that this is actually the type of card that's good enough to just include in your deck just because it's by default strong. The other card we know of so far that doesn't have a rune requirement is Skeletal Sidekick. 1 mana 1/2 Undead. Undead, by the way, new tag, forgot to mention that. Undead, heavily featured in Death Knight cards. Battle Cry. Give a friendly undead +2 attack. This strikes me as a better beaming sidekick, because +2 attack, I think, is generally more valuable than +2 health. So like beaming sidekick, Skeletal Sidekick gives the buff permanently. This is a pretty good card in that it definitely encourages you to build a undead-focused tribe deck. It's 1 mana for 3/2 worth of stats, so that's pretty good. And 2 of the stats are attack and are fast. And fast stats are good. If you have the undead lying around, you can buff it and then attack with it immediately. Blood runes are the tankiest rune, and they have board control effects, large minions, cards that manipulate life totals. So for the player who seems like a control deck, for the player who wants big health, that's kind of me, honestly. I think starting with Obliterate is pretty sweet. This is actually the same exact card as back in Knights of the Frozen Throne when you generated random Death Knight cards, which were like overpowered cards. So yeah, 2 mana Obliterate, destroy a minion, your hero takes damage equal to its health. We sure have come a long way because this card may no longer be overpowered. With only a 1 blood rune requirement, pretty easy to splash this in. Splash, by the way, terminology for like just saying, alright, I'm gonna assign 1 of my runes to be blood. This card comes with an excellent joke. Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because Obliterate 9. Now, do you hate losing that amount of health? Well, how about munching on some gnomes with Gnome Muncher? 6 mana, 5/6 undead. Again with the 1 blood rune requirement. Taunt Lifesteal. At the end of your turn, attack the lowest health enemy. That's like a 6 mana, 5/6 rush with Lifesteal. Remember how good Ziliax was? Ziliax was a 5 mana, 3/2 rush with Lifesteal and Divine Shield. So with no Muncher, just imagine that instead of Divine Shield, you're getting more health. And you're getting the +2 attack. And +2 attack is really important with Lifesteal. If your enemy doesn't kill this, then, you know, you actually attack the face, and at the end of the turn, you attack the lowest health enemy again, and you've gained 15 health. That's a lot of health. The final 1 blood rune card revealed so far is a doozy. It's Patchwork. 7 mana legendary with only 1 blood rune requirement. There's already like murmurings on, one of the interesting ways that Hearthstone team could nerf cards is by like sticking a 2nd blood rune requirement on this, just as an example. But 7 mana 4/6 undead. Battlecry, destroy a random minion in your opponent's hand, deck, and battlefield. Patchwork destroys the opponent's hand's minion, so it's a combo breaker, but it also immediately impacts the board by destroying a minion on the board. Could be a huge one. And on top of that, just for extra measure, it destroys a card in the opponent's deck, which could still be the combo piece, you never know. So a nice card that nearly guarantees that you're gaining card advantage because you're destroying 2 of the opponent's resources immediately. And on top of that, you're getting a 4/6. I can see this being a pretty good reason why people would want to put 1 blood rune in their deck. But again, there's still so many cards to see. Over in 2 blood rune land, we've got Corpse Explosion, 5 mana, Shadow Spell. Detonate a corpse to deal 1 damage to all minions. If any are still alive, repeat this. So people immediately compared this card with Defile, probably because of the 1 damage and repeating it. The big question is, will blood decks actually have this many corpses lying around? And this is where mixing and matching runes might be pretty important, because the Unholy rune cards, even the ones at 1 Unholy rune, seem to be able to generate a bunch of corpses. So this card is maybe tailor-made for the 2 blood, 1 Unholy deck. Is this card good enough to run specifically that combination of runes? We'll see. Clearly a strong board clear, but generating that many corpses for the blood deck might be difficult. We show off another one of Blood's longevity control cards here in Blood Boil. 5 mana Shadow Spell with Lifesteal. Infect all enemy minions. At the end of your turns, they take 2 damage. It's a little bit less good than Consecration in that it doesn't immediately do it. It's at the end of the turns. So like if there was a taunt that you need to get through, you can't, but you're probably a control deck, so this probably doesn't matter. You might even be such a control deck that you can play Blood Boil on your opponent's 4 health minions. Go ahead and suck some health. Sure, your opponent will get 1 attack off and do some damage, but you're gonna lifesteal that health back again and then just kill it by doing nothing the next turn. And how about Vampiric Blood, the 2 mana, 3 blood rune requirement card to top off your control deck. When you have 3 of a rune on a card, I think the card obviously needs to be super powerful because running this card means you cannot run any Unholy cards and you cannot run any Frost rune cards in your deck. 2 mana, give your hero +5 health, spend 3 corpses to gain 5 more and draw a card. So for 2 mana and 3 corpses, you're gaining 10 health and you're also drawing a card. Obviously, 2 mana to gain 10 health, and that's maximum health by the way, and draw a card is pretty good. So it's like 2 mana gain 10 armor and draw a card. But it's actually better than armor because it's max health. Why is max health more important? Well, what if you're running Reno Jackson in your deck? Now you might say, wait a second, you don't put Reno Jackson in a deck with 2 vampiric blood. Then the Reno turns off. But you're a control deck, so maybe you do last that long. I want to live the dream. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to build the 60 health deck, and then I'm going to try to get all the way down to 1 health and then play Reno Jackson and then gain 59 health. And then the opponent will be in despair. Given how strong these 3 rune cards are, it makes a lot of sense to run School Teacher in Death Knight. If you're running the 3 blood deck, you can actually generate the 3 Frost rune requirement cards and the 3 Unholy requirement cards too, by the way. Death Knights are probably not going to get a lot of Discover cards as a result. But that's where you abuse the neutral Discover cards. So very exciting. Naturally, as a big control player, I'm personally the most excited over the Blood Rune spec for Death Knights. Now let's take a look at the Frost Runes. Frost Rune spec is all about powerful burst potential. There's spell synergies with the direct damage, there's card draw, there's mana manipulation, there's freeze effects. This all reads very much like a combo deck plus freeze mage. So the 1 Frost Rune requirement cards, we see Glacial Advance, 3 mana frost spell, deal 4 damage, your next spell this turn costs 2 less. I think this card really encapsulates what the entire frost spec is about. You're dealing 4 damage for only 1 mana as long as you combo it with other spells. Also at 1 rune requirement, Defrost, 2 mana frost spell, draw a card, spend 2 corpses to draw another. I can definitely see how your combo Frost deck might want 2 mana, draw 2 cards. Makes sense. It seems like Frost decks might be light on minions, but again, you have your hero power to generate corpses. You've also got the 1 Frost Rune requirement, Acolyte of Death, 3 mana 3/4, after a friendly undead dies, draw a card. This seems like the card type that you're going to splash into another rune archetype. Probably the one that summons a bunch of undead. That would be the Unholy spec. So maybe this is for the 1 Frost 2 Unholy deck. The previous card mentioned where you draw 2 cards if you have corpses to sacrifice also makes a lot of sense to run with Unholy. Well, this card can draw a bunch of cards, and the stat line is pretty solid. Over in the 2 rune requirement spells, cards, we've got Frost Strike, 2 mana frost spell, deal 3 damage to a minion. If that kills it, discover a Frost Rune card. This card seems a lot like Runed Orb from Mage, which is a pretty strong card, only not being run right now because frost spells are really important. Frost Strike similarly looks pretty good. It is a frost spell, very importantly, because the next card we're going to show has a very important requirement of frost spells. I actually think this card might be a little bit worse than Ruined Orb, but it depends on the quality of Frost Rune cards. One of the big payoffs for your Frost deck appears to be Overseer Frigidara. 6 mana, 5/6, Battlecry, draw 2 spells. If they're both frost spells, deal 2 damage to all enemies. That's really strong. Draw 2 is worth about 3 mana. Deal 2 damage to all enemies is worth about 3 mana. 5/6 is worth about 4 mana. You add that up together, it's like worth about 10 mana. Plus the fact that you're bundling it all together. So running a deck with frost spells, it's good. You've got what appears to be a real combo card here over at 2 runes as well. Horn of Winter, frost spell, refresh 2 mana crystals. This is clearly going to be for the most combo-y of frost spec decks, it seems, where you want to just go off on a single turn, cast a bunch of spells, cast Horn of Winter, refresh the mana crystals, cast a few more spells. Remains to be seen if such a combo deck exists. Clearly by printing this card, they wanted this deck to exist. Note that this is refreshed 2 mana crystal, so it does not ramp you ahead. It's meant for like a turn that's you want to spend 14 mana on, and then you like spend some of your mana, and then you Horn of Winter, and then you spend even more mana. And the big payoff for Frost Spec Death Knights, Frostwyrm's Fury, 7 mana, 3 Frost rune requirements, deal 5 damage, freeze all enemy minions, summon a 5/5 Frostwyrm. This kind of goes to show just how good Snowfall Guardian was. Snowfall Guardian for Shaman, 6 mana, freeze all minions, and summon nerfed now to 5/5. For 1 more mana, you also deal 5 damage. This card looks perfect for the combo Frost plan, where you're pointing a lot of damage to the face. This stalls out your opponent's board by freezing them, while also frozen minions can't attack your Frostwyrm. So this could be like 7 mana, deal 10 damage, and also prevent a lot of damage to you. Yeah, that's good. And finally, let's take a look at these Unholy rune cards. These cards are in the flavor of summoning a bunch of undead minions, having a bunch of minions die and generate corpses, and then using these corpses to do really powerful effects. A lot of decks that are Frost and that are Blood who want corpses might actually want to dip into one Unholy to get these cards. We've got Graveyard Shift, 3 mana, 1 rune requirement. Summon 2 1/1 zombies with Reborn. Reborn is coming back, and those Reborn cards, they generate corpses as well. So this card, I mean, it generates 4 corpses over time, and those are really sticky minions. So if there's wide board buffs, this is another good reason to run this card. It's kind of like Token Druid, except the Token Druid like automatically came with casting Soul of the Forest. Seems potentially pretty gross. Seems strong. By itself, it is a fairly slow card. Not very threatening to spend 3 mana on 2 total attack, but very, very sticky. You also have Plague Strike, very efficient. This is 2 mana for a shadow spell which deals 3 damage to a minion. If that kills it, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. You know how I've generally compared a lot of the new cards to Flanking Strike, the old school 4 mana deal 3 and summon a 3/3. The classic like kill a guy, get a guy card, good to get ahead. Well, a 2/2 zombie with Rush is pretty comparable to a 3/3. This is a 2 mana Flanking Strike practically. You've also got Dark Transformation over at 1 rune, 2 mana shadow spell, transform an undead into a 4/5 undead monstrosity with Rush. I think this is a card that you're going to pretty much be using on your hero power most of the time. Your hero power, 2 mana, summon a 1/1 undead with charge, a zombie. You can actually hit the face with that before you play Dark Transformation, and then that's effectively a 4 mana, 4/5 with Rush. Over on the 2 rune requirement, in order to put this card in your deck, you got Battlefield Necromancer showing us just how Unholy spec'd Death Knights can spend all of their corpses. 2 mana, 2/3. At the end of your turn, raise a corpse as a 1/2 Risen Footman with Taunt. Green Jelly was a 5 mana card that got you a 1/2 with Taunt each turn, and sometimes it had the ability to take over the game because your opponent couldn't make it past the stupid 1/2 Taunt, and then the Jelly kept summoning taunts. Battlefield Necromancer, instead of costing 5 mana, costs 2 mana. If you generate a corpse on turn 1, on turn 2 you can summon the Battlefield Necromancer and potentially snowball the game as you protect your Necromancer with a 1/2 taunt. And then each turn after that, assuming you keep generating corpses. Big reminder, the Risen Footman with Taunt does not generate a corpse when it dies. Generally, when you raise corpses, those are the cards that specifically have the text does not generate a corpse. And cards with Risen in them do not generate corpse. Yeah, if you keep feeding this Necromancer, the amount of value you get is incredible. It's a 2 mana 3/5 already by default at start if you have a corpse. And if you have more corpses and the Necro stays alive, it just gets worse and worse for the opponent. Another way to spend all those corpses is with Army of the Dead. 5 mana Shadow Spell, raise up to 5 corpses as 2/2 Risen Ghouls with Rush. That's 5 mana for 10 worth of stats with Rush. Did you think Scales of Onyxia was strong? It's difficult to really know whether or not you'll have that many corpses. That is a pretty big price to pay. But if you have, like, corpses just lying around, haha, well, that is, for a mana cost, really efficient. Finally, you got the topper on this entire Unholy package. If you're willing to commit all 3 of your runes into Unholy, you can put Lord Merogar into your deck. 8 mana 9/7 undead with Battlecry, raise all of your corpses as 1/1 Risen Golems with Rush. For each that can't fit, give 1+2/+2. You've been playing your Unholy deck, you've summoned a bunch of guys, they've died, you've generated a bunch of corpses. At the end, you play Lord Merogar, and then you might just win. Because let's suppose you have 15 corpses in the bank. 33-31 in stats for 8 mana. Lord Merogar is definitely a prime example of, wow, that card is super overpowered, but balanced, because if you put this card in your deck, you can't put any of the Blood or Frost Ruin cards into your deck. Now, obviously, way too early to say whether or not your token Death Knight deck is going to need any Blood or Frost cards, because most of them seem to be an Unholy, probably by design. So might just make so much sense to just run the Lord Merogar and all of your tokeny, swarmy, Unholy decks. But maybe there's a really important 1 Rune Blood or 1 Rune Frost card out there. So really interesting looking at these cards. It's clearly going to be a very interesting deck building thing. 10 unique ways to even have your deck building requirement in Death Knight. The mind boggles at the types of decks that you can build around this one class. And it's got clearly really powerful cards to reward you if you decide to go all in on one specific archetype. By the way, I leave you with a spooky thought. You know how Sire Denathris is pretty good because you play him late game, and then you do a bunch of damage, you heal a bunch of health, and sometimes you just kill the opponent? Well, Death Knight has a way to increment Sire Denathris by 1 each time you use the hero power and send one of your zombos away to die. Denathris seems like it'll be pretty strong in 2 different archetypes. In the Blood deck, where you're going to be living for a very long time, so Denathris will be around for a while and keep powering up. Might be your win condition, or a very large part of your win condition, and if not the win condition, certainly like a big stabilizer. And then you've got Unholy as well, which is just going to generate a bunch of corpses, which means a lot of stuff is going to die, and then Denathris will power up. Good finisher there too. Hail Denathris!